mainly focused on social, mobile, big data, and cloud apps. I blog about trends in software development. You're welcome to visit my blog. I am a keen observer of latest developments in cloud, mobile computing. So that's why my interest in today's topic. In addition to that, I also am interested in API management, about which I'll talk whenever I get an opportunity next time. So with that, I'll let Mukund introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Mukund. I've been in the software industry about 17 years, working on multiple domains. I am a technology enthusiast. I run a meetup group in Pune called TechNext, which we have currently about 1,400 members. My interests include software architecture, mobile, web applications, and basically keeping myself, in sync with the latest trends.
Thank you, Mukund. So we are today going to first look at the big picture. There's a change that we see happening. So we started. Let's look at historically what's been happening in the world of software development. We started before year 2000. If you see, we used to have client-server applications, wherein you mainly had desktop-based clients and servers, and that changed come year 2000. From 2000 to now, most of the software development has been happening around the World Wide Web, given the internet, and most of our focus is on developing applications which are working inside browsers and with app servers or web servers on the server side. Soon, what we're going to see is going to change to a future scenario wherein you'll have cloud-based servers, which will be virtual servers, not physical servers, but cluster of servers on the cloud, which are publishing services which are being consumed by mobile devices, and these could be, tablets or smartphones or, anything that you can think of. So that's how we are going to look at what's going to happen in the future. It's a mix of multiple things. If you see the future, so you will have coexistence of systems which are legacy systems, right from client server and web-based systems to the latest systems which focus more on the cloud and the mobile devices. So you will have a variety here that you will have to have, or you will have to provide for coexistence of this variety of systems. But within this variety, you will also have some commonality. The common ground being there are some services which are required commonly by almost all applications, such as push notifications. For example, a service engineer in the field might have to be notified about his next call. Or it could be cloud storage, which all of us often are using for storing pictures and videos, and organizations are sharing documents using cloud storage. So today everyone wants cloud storage, which is a common requirement. We communicate with our customers, suppliers, employees, future employees or candidates using social media, and everyone cutting across the board today is demanding social media integration. In addition to these cross-cutting functionalities, we also want location sensitivity for many of our apps. Like, for example, when a traveling executive is requesting a BI report, a business intelligence report, the system itself should be intelligent enough to know that the report has a context of the area from which he is requesting it, where he is visiting. And user management, wherein you would like to have common one-time login using OAuth and authentication and authorization, which is centrally managed and used by various applications. And last but not the least, big data search, which is people want like the minimalistic way in which you can use some keywords to search terabytes of data. So that is something which is going to be required. For example, a customer is wanting to track the progress, and he just types in a few words and he comes to know what is happening to his order. So these are some of the commonly required functionalities, and that's what BaaS provides. So by definition, backend as a service is providing web and mobile app developers with a way to link their applications to the backend cloud storage, simultaneously providing features like what we saw, like push notifications, social media integration, user management, and all the stuff. Now, to put things in perspective, BaaS is an evolved thing out of what has been happening. So it has been evolving for many, many years now. It started with SaaS. So SaaS is software as a service, and how do you differentiate between what we call as SaaS or software as a service with other things like infrastructure as a service or platform as a service and BaaS? So these are you can say progression one after the other. So software as a service was primarily used by end users who didn't want to install a new application every time, so they could just simply go and configure something to suit themselves and start publishing that to their users as it was developed by them. So it is something which was a software that became a service and that got utilized by the end users of an application. When this started happening, infrastructure was required to be provided, and virtualization, mainly popularized by Amazon EC2 and S3, are good examples of infrastructure as a service, where an application developer can request infrastructure on the fly and get additional memory or get additional processing power or get additional servers as and when required. That evolved further, where once this infrastructure was available, people demanded some additional functionality, such as having the environment configured on top of it, like database servers, app servers, build servers, version control and code repository, continuous integration environment, and all that is commonly required for a good development plus deployment environment was demanded, and that's what was provided by the likes of Heroku, and that's what we know as platform as a service. And finally, now coming to backend as a service, which is mainly used by front-end developers of mobile apps, wherein the backend is provided. Whatever is common functionality which we saw, like user management, social media integration, push notifications, etc., is commonly provided. A good example, we'll be seeing many examples of BaaS. One good example that comes to my mind is Kinway. So with this, I'll hand over to Mukund, who will be diving into more details of backend as a service. At this point, if you have any questions, or we might take them at the end.
So I think
okay.
we're not seeing questions coming yet. I'd let Mukund lead.
Okay.
Okay. Hey, so I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One is how BaaS helps us deploy applications and provides us benefits in getting to the market quickly, and also about vendor selection. So the first thing which BaaS does, the most primary and the most important thing which BaaS does for developers is the ability to quickly test our marketing minimum viable product. So it allows us to quickly assemble components for building a mobile product, and allows us to focus on testing out the MVP rather than spending time on getting the entire infrastructure in place. In addition, it allows us to rinse and repeat to validate the business model and avoiding the cost of the back-end development. The other thing which BaaS does, which is interesting and useful for mobile development, is the scalability of the infrastructure. So by using most of the BaaS providers provide scalability. So if you, as an example, in the early 2000s, we have a platform whose user base went from less than 100 users to 5 million users in about 3 years. Whereas if you look at an example from 2013, the messaging application MessageMe went to 1 million users in 10 days and went to 5 million users just 75 days after launch. So scalability of the infrastructure to meet the business requirement is critical, especially for mobile apps. And by using backend as a service, some of these are provided to us by the service providers. The other side of the coin when you talk about scaling infrastructure is the utilization. When we talk about utilizing infrastructure, the user load varies for the application based on time of day. And it's important for us to maintain utilize the infrastructure in an efficient way so that we don't end up over-commissioning and over-commissioning hardware and losing money on idle hardware. So one example, just as an example of that, there's an example of how Pinterest does scaling. So you can say the user, they could go up to 60 commissioned servers in the prime time in the evening, and they go to less than 15 servers at night. So this is elevated by BaaS providers by their billing models. Many of them give a pay as you use model. So you don't really have to worry about how many servers you commission or whether the infrastructure is being utilized fully. The other advantage of BaaS is the built-in analytics. So when you start using a backend as a service, you by default we get analysis on the server side storage, the API calls, concurrent users, and all different metrics. And many BaaS providers provide analytics on the client side as well as part of their SDK. There are some more advantages of using BaaS providers. There is a very advanced push notification system which comes as part of the package. There are easy integration with third-party services like OAuth, web service connectors with external data sources. The tools are very developer-friendly and the SDKs are mature. BaaS providers also give us the API versioning and sandboxing, which allows us to support the multiple versions of our product in the market and also test out the product before deploying live. With that, I would like to shift to the other aspect of backend as a service, which is the developing market, the mushrooming vendors in the market, and some of the considerations which we need to do to ensure that we choose a provider which suits our requirements.
Mukund, if I may interrupt you with one question that I'm seeing come in, which is how is BaaS related to API management? Is it an adjacent concept or is it a competing concept?
So let me take this question. This is Vinayak here. So these two things coexist. They are complementary to each other, as we are already seeing. For example, API management allows you to manage various versions. So at a time, your API would be used by some users of your old version of an API. At the same time, new version. So how do you manage that? So that is something which API management provides. So BaaS and API management are complementary concepts. Also, API management, we talked about matrix. So when you talk about analytics that is provided, so API management allows you to observe various services, how they're performing, and also the usage details, and monitor them for, so supposing if you're launching a minimum viable product and you would like to have certain matrix defined, how do you do that? So that's what API management provides. So it's a complementary concept to backend as a service, and these two coexist, and we see them coexisting in the future.
Okay.
Okay. So to continue our discussion, the marketplace for BaaS is very, the service providers for BaaS have come up a lot in the recent years. So if you look at a sample of the providers that are out there, I just plotted on the year in which most of these organizations were founded. And you can see a number of these organizations have come up in the past 3 years. And in fact, if you look at BaaS, which came up in 2011, that was just taken over by Facebook in the this April. So some of the considerations which we could have for selecting the vendors for backend as a service is the lock-in mitigation. So when because we are entrusting the provider with our data and the entire infrastructure of our application, we need to make sure that we don't get locked into a vendor, so that we can migrate from one vendor to a different solution as required. And that includes things like the SDK provided by the vendor is customizable, whether it's open source, whether we have access to our application data in an easy manner, whether we can export our data from the BaaS system on a regular basis, and so on. The other consideration which we need to do is have some analysis done on the scalability and performance, because there is no central authority which certifies the scalability or the performance of a vendor under load. And the other important consideration which we need to do when looking at BaaS is the stability of the vendor as such, because of the mushrooming of the large number of vendors in recent years. There have been at least quite a few who have come up, stayed in beta and gone away. For example, there was one called CloudDirect, I believe from Singapore, which just closed shop. So the stability of the BaaS vendor is interesting, and then something which needs to be looked at. The other considerations is what kind of enterprise features are provided. Whether the service can be hosted inside the enterprise network on a private cloud, or whether it is only available on a public cloud. And what kind of platforms and SDKs are supported by the system, and is there desktop support or any BlackBerry support and so on. Few other points for vendor selection are whether the ease of upgrading the schema and the applications, whether API management, API versioning are mature, and whether sandboxing is provided. Again, if we want to do analytics, what is the level of analytics which is provided by the vendor? For example, APG provides a whole lot of in-depth analytics, which is not present in some of the other vendors. And last not least, the development ease and the maturity of the SDK. So how good the documentation is, how stable the SDK is, and how is the SDK proprietary, is the SDK open source, and so on. So for example, vendors like StackMob have an open source SDK. So these are considerations to be looked into when making the choice of a vendor. That being said, the trend seems to be with regard to the consolidation of the domain and the entry of large players. So Facebook's acquisition of BaaS seems to be the first entry of a large player into the domain. There are some new entities like Key, which have been formed by large established players in the field. So even though they are young, they are established by large companies. So we see the entry of these large players coming into the system. Backend customization, I'm referring to the business logic which we can plug in into the backend. The level of support for business logic customization on the backend varies from vendors, and that is still evolving and maturing with time. Some more improvements are required in the areas of accessibility and interoperability. So with regard to supporting not just the mobile devices, but supporting all kind of desktop operating systems which are required in an enterprise or for an application, and also some level of support or to communicate with people who do not use a smartphone. And with regard to interoperability, the list keeps improving, but I'm basically talking about the web connectors to enterprise systems and to other business applications within the organization. So that's my take on the trends there. And with that, at this point, I would like to see if we can take any questions.
All right. So, and I'd encourage the audience to put in their questions in the questions panel. One of the questions that came up is, how do these platforms work in a continuous deployment type of scenario where developers are building features and functionality, and they need to be offered online, either through a development environment or production environment? How does that work with BaaS? Is that a separate tool set, or do these BaaS vendors actually cover this aspect also?
Yeah, so it's not a general answer that I'm going to provide here, Ashish, but if you look at the evolution, much before BaaS vendors came into existence, what we saw, platform as a service, is something that provides for that, and BaaS is typical way wherein a user or a developer is allowed to, he can see his new latest code that he just checked in being at a very quick pace built and deployed within a few minutes, and it starts appearing. The latest version starts, the changes that he checked in start taking effect on the server in a few minutes. So the building and the deployment part that happens completely automatically, just like you do in the case of continuous delivery. So that is something that is a given in platform as a service, and since we're talking about backend as a service, which is a more evolved version of platform as a service, one would expect it to work the same way. Having said that, it will change or it will differ from vendor to vendor. So there may be some vendors who don't provide it, but if you ask me, when I select my vendor, I would rather go to someone who provides it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another question.
Mukund has something to add here, Ashish.
Yeah. Just to add to the discussion, so when we talk about continuous integration and deployment, the backend server logic support from BaaS vendors is still limited. Most of them allow you to do some kind of a Node.js based JavaScript business validation. So that is still evolving and still not mature. So at the best, what you get as on date is just a sandbox, so where you can play around with the schema changes, and most of the play with your schema changes and with your code changes, so that you can test it out before switching it on to live. If you talk about is there a plugin available for Bamboo or Jenkins, at this point of time, no.
Yeah, I think, Mukund, that's something that users should not even have to bother about.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the backend using Bamboo or Jenkins, or what kind of continuous integration it should be on. You just check in the code and it starts taking effect the way you described in a sandbox mode. Yeah. And then you push another button and it becomes live.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So another question that come up is, what do we know in terms of sort of interoperability of these BaaS systems? So do StackMob and Kinway, for example, work together? Can they live side by side, or does the company have to sort of commit to one path upfront?
So most of them, so your applications communication with other systems is mainly through a REST API. So if you are hosting multiple vendors, then the best bet to go with is to have the own API defined for communication between both parts of the system. So you would export some of the functionality on the component running on one vendor, and then you would consume the same functionality with the component running on the other vendor. By default, what they provide in terms of web connectors is for things like OAuth or things like enterprise systems like SAP, but that works only inside your network. So those kind of connectors are what is standard. There is no connector for working with a different BaaS vendor. There are migration tools available for converting from one BaaS vendor to another. I haven't seen an interop API just yet.
Okay, so another question that's come up, and this is an interesting one, because I think we always talk of smartphones and sort of forget that there's still a sizable set of people on feature phones. So one question is, what are the SMS capabilities out of the box for BaaS vendors, especially if you're doing notifications and such? Is that something that these systems do out of the box, or is it something that you have to sign up separately with the SMS service provider?
Very few vendors provide it as part of their service, which you need to again sign up for. So they do SMS notification, and they do interactive voice response systems as well. They provide them mostly for communication perspective and for getting some kind of minimalistic user feedback. But these these are limited to one or two BaaS vendors, and it's not generally available. So at this point of time, if you are looking for extensive support, I do think it's something which needs to be signed up for externally and then integrated.
All right.
Yeah. So one thing that we can do is when we talk about some of the legacy phones, then your application itself will have limited functionality. Namely, it might not go into more sophisticated functionality. And if you're ready for keeping that limited to push notifications that go either as push notifications in an app or as SMS messages on a regular feature phone, in which case there are solutions like provided by mBlocks, which is a company that essentially was a company that was in mass text messaging that has graduated into a BaaS provider, mainly for push notifications. So there could be a limited solution available like that, but as Mukund said, broadly you can generalize that your BaaS providers are waiting for everyone to graduate to smartphones.
Okay. Okay, and I guess we can probably take one last question, and this is about how do you manage the risk? If we went with a particular BaaS vendor, is there a way of future-proofing our choice? And for example, do you need to sort of put in a provider model between your code and a BaaS vendor, or what are some of the strategies available to sort of future-proof our choice of BaaS vendor that we might make today?
Yeah, so we spoke about this briefly during our vendor selection considerations. The good thing is when it comes to the actual application communication, most of them rely on the REST API. So you are actually designing to an API which you can actually replace in the backend at a later point of time. So you're not tying into a proprietary protocol or proprietary communication between your smartphone and the provider. Now, if there are features you use, for example, some of the providers provide premium features like file sync or data sync across devices. So when you sign up for things like that, then of course you need to take a call on what's the impact of business if that functionality goes away. But if you're talking about using BaaS as a data store with some business logic and your devices talking to these service providers, that is pretty much a standard REST API which is already, as a provider consumer, the interface is already defined. So you're building something on your own to replace the backend at a later point of time is doable, though migration would require some thought.
All right. So I think our time is up for today. I would like to thank everybody who attended this webinar, and look forward to seeing the webinar posted on our website. You can also follow us on Twitter at Synerzip webinar, and keep an eye out for future discussions. I think there's an interesting string of webinars around technology, so hopefully you like this one, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.